Namaskar and thank you for joining us here on this weekly program on GOE Economics. We'll discuss how the Indian economy seems to be steering clear of global headwinds and maintaining the growth momentum. This is from the post-COVID recovery phase, where pent-up demand had brought life back into several sectors. Now, despite the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, India seems to have maintained the growth path, which is spurred by a large and fast-growing middle class and lots of FDI inflows. S&P has said that India will overtake Japan and Germany by 2030, clearly reposing faith in several sectors that are driving India's growth story. To discuss this, we hope to be joined a little while by Dr. Nilanjan Banik, professor at Mahindra University, and currently we have with us Dr. Amit Kapoor, who's chairman at the Institute of Competitiveness and visiting scholar at Stanford University. Thank you very much, Dr. Kapoor, for being with us. Now, why is India resilient? I mean, is it the result of sound economic management during COVID and the post-COVID recovery?
So this is a very important question in terms of what creates that resilience for India. And there are multiple things that I actually look at in terms of how India has to be seen. So one is very clearly there is a structural market stability that exists within the system. And of course, there have been huge policy-driven economic measures, which started with the COVID crisis itself. And there were some very positive steps that were actually taken care of. And the other thing that has actually happened in the last 5 years specifically is that we have received a fairly gargantuan sum of foreign direct investment that actually reflects the stability of the economic system that we are having. And if you really look at what has happened in India post-COVID, there are multiple things that have happened. Like one is, of course, if you really look at merchandise exports, we have seen a huge growth of merchandise exports that have happened. Earlier, we could have always said that India is actually facing that effect because there is a low GDP, but now the base has actually risen. And now what we are seeing is a fairly interesting multiplier of growth that is happening. So for every percentage point that we actually add is going to have a huge impact. But having said that, I think there was something very interesting again that happened about 5-7 years back, and it started there because I see that there are economic reforms have actually had two distinct eras. One was a 1991 phase, and there is a phase post 2014. Wherein what we have seen that there is a huge streamlining of business processes that have happened. Yes. A couple of points that I would like to read out. That we have actually seen that about 75,000 compliances have actually been effectively removed. There are close to about 1,486 revocation of certain useless legal formalities that used to exist, which has promoted ease of doing business. And there have been huge stimulus measures that have also happened. So it is not just saying everything is post-COVID. It's a step-by-step function that it has actually followed.
So it's sound economic management. Dr. Banik is with us. Dr. Banik, S&P sees India becoming a $7.3 trillion economy in nominal terms by 2030. What sectors do you see driving this growth?
I think, Mark, let's start with the basic, which is 2/3 of the domestic consumption in the Indian economy is driven by the domestic sector alone. Now, when we are talking about the domestic sector, you will find that the huge amount of gross value addition is coming from the services sector. Now, typically what comes to our mind, we talk about or think about all the IT sector jobs, which are tradable in nature. But if you see what is actually driving the domestic economy, it's the non-tradable parts of services.
Okay, we seem to be having a little problem with Dr. Banik's connection. Dr. Banik, we'll come back to you. We'll re-establish our connection with you and come back to you. But Dr. Kapoor, let's move on. The 7.8% first quarter that we've seen this year growth, it is despite of a high base. This also shows good momentum, doesn't it? And S&P seems to see that this is being sustained for the long term. There are global headwinds. The Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, has said so. The RBI has said so. Is India steering clear of these headwinds? I mean, India seems to be quite isolated when it comes to the wars in the West and the Middle East.
I think there's a larger point here at play. It is not that India is what do you call not facing the headwinds or whatever. It goes back to what is happening within the country. A couple of points as to what Niranjan was actually trying to say is that what is that domestic demand that is actually happening? There is this rise of the middle class. People are actually spending money, and there is a huge creation of domestic consumption that is driving growth. Yes, headwinds can actually have an impact on the Indian economy, especially if you really look at how oil would actually have an impact, or how oil prices can have an impact. But what we have seen is that there is a smart management of reserves, there is smart management of pricing. We have been able to sustain that. And we've actually had some foreign policy measures which are having a positive impact on the Indian economy. So overall, if you really look at it, it is just not that we are resilient from any kind of things that are affecting outside, like because of the war that has actually broken out between Israel and Hamas, or if you really talk about the Ukraine war, they continue to have an impact. If you really look at the,
Okay.
and of course, the COVID also had an impact. But what we see here is that how India is progressing forward, really to become integrated with the global supply chains. We are seeing a huge development of opportunities there. A couple of points, like if you really look at PLI itself, PLI in itself is actually creating multipliers across different set of sectors. We've already seen evidence which shows that PLI is having a positive impact on certain sectors of the country. And as to your previous question, what we are also seeing is that there is this huge rise that we are seeing, at least in 5 or 6 distinct sectors within the country. Yes, we have this whole services sector. I cannot disagree with Niranjan at all. But the question here is that if you really look at the fintech sector, how it is growing, or how we are focusing on food processing, or how we are really looking at semiconductors as we go along within the country, we are seeing steps towards that direction itself. And one of the most unique areas that which I feel is going to emerge now is the space idea itself. With Chandrayaan going on to the moon and with that success story we are seeing, there is an exploding sector which is going to be driven by technology that India is actually going to be looking at.
So clearly there is a direction that we are seeing. Dr. Banik, you know, the IMF also sees resilient domestic demand and also strong investment inflows as key factors in India's favor. But domestic demand, I mean, if one has to break this down a bit, it means that the income is also growing, is it, in the hands of the middle class? Is that sustainable across sectors? Dr. Banik?
I think I will just carry forward what Amit was mentioning. To hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, go ahead, sir. Go ahead. Yeah.
So basically, if you see the number of the global capability centers in India, it has increased to almost 2,000 as we speak, which means, and these global capability centers are actually the offshore units of the multinational companies. So why they are investing in India? Because if you look into the PMI, Purchasing Manager Index of services as well as manufacturing sector, both of this as we speak is in excess of 58, which also means in terms of employability, in terms of production, in terms of inventory management, in terms of supply chain issues, India is really doing well because PMI index in excess of 50 is an implication. So many multinationals are shifting their offshore office in India. Now, to come back to the points, which are the sectors within this broad economy which are performing well? Of course, the financial sector, the healthcare sector, the tourism sector, these are the sectors which are doing well. In addition to that, what you will also find that because the government of India is infusing so much of capital expenditure, you see a multiplier effect. Capital expenditure is not only in terms of building roads, ports, or and physical infrastructure, which has actually brought down the cost of doing business.
Yes, Dr. Banik, we seem to be having a little problem with your connectivity.
So you
Yeah.
find that all this IT-related has actually led to increase in what we say a huge amount of business activity happening across India, be it within urban area or be it within the rural sector. And that has created a huge multiplier effect in terms of income generation. And that's why you see that the middle class of the Indian economy is also growing.
Okay. Dr. Kapoor, let's look at the impact of the global pressures a little bit. Asia's growth is expected to slow. Global growth we are seeing is slowing. Global inflation is not under control. Monetary tightening cycle continues. Has the worst passed? And, is India in the clear, having shown resilience so far in the tough times?
So again, this is a very important point for us to understand, like whether the worst has passed or not. Like that's a very hypothetical question in terms of like how things are. I also see that there are going to be challenges in the future per se. Like if you really look at, say, the global climate crisis. But now the question is that how do we create those crises into an opportunity? I'm seeing in India right now is emergence of unique business models and how we're exploiting the opportunities that are arising from a certain set of crises. Like when you talk about climate change is real, without a doubt. But what India is doing is that it is focusing on sectors like, say, green energy storage, and you're seeing emergence of enterprises like Greenco in this country, and that's a very positive impact. So what we see here is that it is not that global headwinds are going anywhere, but the question is the kind of activities that India is focusing on and how it is actually going to move forward with that. But there is a very important part to really look at this story, and that is that if you really look at India itself, India is the fastest growing or the highest or the second highest among the G20 countries right now, and it is being driven by robust demand that actually exists within the system. And that is what we are seeing is the rise in incomes to a certain level, and it is actually going across the board. Of course, you will always have disparities, inequalities, and you can always go into the debate. But the question here is that what we are seeing is that there is a positive uptake on that. The second thing that is happening within India is huge investments on infrastructure. Infrastructure in itself creates very interesting cycles. Like it is about what do you call as direct demand, direct effects, indirect effects, and induced impacts. So there are those impacts that we are actually seeing right now within the country. So, and then of course, like food inflation, if you really ask me, it is not there to stay. It is going to stabilize over a period of time. Countries are taking those actions. But my only worry is going to be about wars. And the second thing is going to be climate. And are we in a position to create unique models? And I do see huge new things that are happening within the country. If you really look at the last 10 years itself, the rise of enterprises which are working in these sectors is absolutely a telling story for India or from India.
Okay. Dr. Banik, if you can hear me, yes. How healthy are government revenues? And, what impact does it have on sustaining growth? We're seeing very high GST collections.
Yeah, in terms of direct tax collection, now we have 1.9 trillion Indian rupees, which is collected, out of which 1 trillion rupees is coming from the corporate sector. So, what does it tell you? It tells you that in terms of direct tax collection, there has been an increase 21 percentage point, which also means that the Indian economy is doing well, because only when the economy is doing well, you will be able to pay more taxes. The other point which I want to flag in detail, which happens to be the largest contributor in terms of sustaining the GDP growth, it has increased from 55% in 2012 as we speak in the year 2000.
Right. We seem to be having a bad connection with you, Dr. Banik. I'm sorry, we are not able to hear you properly.
And so are what you see in terms.
Yeah, your sound seems to be coming in and out.
Can you hear me now? Is it?
Yeah, actually, it keeps coming in, and it sort of freezes for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I will try and correct that and then get back to you. But Dr. Kapoor, if you could talk a little bit about government revenues and how they are, impacting or sustaining our growth.
So, of course, what we are seeing is that the GST collections are rising, but the most important set of questions here are a certain set of numbers that we have to really look. If you really look at it, like the deficit is actually expected to decrease from about 6.4% to 5.9%. That itself reflects a resilient system that we are actually building. The second thing is that public debt is going to stabilize at about 80% of the GDP, and the current deficit is also expected to narrow to 1.4% of the GDP. So if you really look at it, like we are seeing some healthy governmental revenues and stability on the balance sheet. And if you really look at what India has done over a period of time is that we have lowered the tax rates, but we are seeing that collections are remaining stable. So what we are seeing is that there are spends that are happening because GST revenues reflect that, because the overall collections are improving, and GST collection is close to about 6.7, 6.8% of GDP at this point in time, which is indicative of strengthening of what you would call as India's fiscal foundations. So we are moving into a correct direction. It is a fairly healthy balance sheet right now. I think it is also driving a lot of investment in infrastructure that we are seeing, which is going to create an impact over a future or over the next 20 to 30 years.
Indeed. Also, Dr. Kapoor, India has clean balance sheets. It has good forex reserves. There's no problem with the current account. What is India poised to do? I mean, in terms of creating a reliable supply side. You were talking a little bit earlier about how impressive our infrastructure is, or building infrastructure. But, when we are looking at massive growth to become a $7.3 trillion economy in the next few years, is this adequate?
Oh, so like as an economist, when I answer that question, I'll always say that we can always invest more in infrastructure. And the more, the better, because it is always going to create a better multiplier over a period of time. Because, say, if you really look at the kind of infrastructure that we have built, say, let's see, I recently went on the Delhi-Bombay Expressway, which is a phenomenal experience in itself, like how quickly we are able to move onto that road. So that is going to fundamentally reduce the cost of movement of goods. But if I'm able to do better across the country, it will create huge sets of positives. So even today, if you really look at on the overall figures, the movement of goods is fairly expensive. Like it is much cheaper to bring goods from, say, at points in time, from Japan to the coast, than from Bihar to the coast. So we have to improve that infrastructure. So we invest more, it'll always be better. But having said that, I think India has moved away from that status of being called as fragile five at one point in time to being a very important destination. It is driven through infrastructural investments. And that those infrastructural investments are just not about talking about roads. It is also about multiple sets of things that are actually happening. The most important being, say, the connectivity, airports. I think airports that we are actually seeing, the ports that we are seeing, the real estate development that we are seeing across the board is something which is huge. But I would still, as an economist, I would still want that we should focus on more infrastructure, because there is a spatial difference that we see in India on infrastructure. Because if you see the southern states, or if you really see places like Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, they seem to have better infrastructure than some of the other states. So if you're able to actually just go equally across the states, that would have a much more positive impact in the next few years.
I'm told that Dr. Banik is with us on the phone line. I hope we have a clear connection with you, Dr. Banik. Yes, is the economic world also being divided, since we are talking about headwinds and India flying above it, whether it is, it's being divided into the pro-free world camp and the others. Is this, if this is going to harden, will it affect India?
See, one of the things is India is a large growing economy, and most part of our growth is dependent upon fossil fuel, which is crude. Now, India has done a smart thing in terms of getting crude at a concessional rate from Russia. But after this Gaza war, everyone is still apprehensive that maybe crude may cross that psychological mark of $100 per barrel. Because now what we see at this point of time, crude is hovering around 89 and $90 per barrel, which has still not surpassed the September mark. Now, what you see and what is kind of we are hopeful about is people are talking about it being a religious war, but it is not a religious war, because if you see what is happening, Iran is actually helping out Armenia, which is a Catholic-dominated country. On the contrary, countries like Turkey or Egypt, they are economically not that strong enough to directly come into war. Because in Egypt, if you see, inflation is hovering around 38%. And also in Turkey, they have had this February earthquake, because of which their economy is still not in a strong position to support a direct war. So what we are, and if you again look into the Middle East as a whole, you will find that most part of them have not come out openly criticizing Israel, and they still feel that what Israel is doing in terms of self-defense. The biggest gainer from this whole scenario is Iran, because they want to settle this deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, because Iran felt that if this deal between US and Saudi Arabia were to happen, they would be left out in the Muslim-dominated world. Being the Shia community, Iran feel that if the Sunnis join hand with the Zionists, then they are going to be left out. Now, because that is not going to happen, because what has happened because of this war, the deal between Saudi and the Israel, that has now been, it has to continue for some time now. So my thing is, I'm still hopeful that the bigger powers in the Middle East, they are not going to directly join the war because of the political and the economic reasons which I just stated, which also means India can keep its current account deficit under control. So this is a good thing.
Okay, we leave it there. Thanks, Dr. Banik, for joining us, because we seem to have had a bad connection with you. But thank you very much for being with us. Dr. Kapoor, you know, you can also come in on that question, because it is about the way the world is being divided. Is it being divided also on economic lines based on these wars?
I think when you are saying economic lines, eventually no. What we are really seeing is the developed and the underdeveloped world. In fact, India has taken a very important position within the G20 right now, where what you're calling is the global south. So what we are really seeing right now is this rise of the idea of that we have to focus on the developing world, we have to focus on the global south, and that is where opportunities will arise. So that is there. And of course, like, wars are actually creating a division in terms of the foreign policy, whether it is actually based on economic ideas or religious ideas or whatever. Those are things for experts to think about. Like, from my point of view, what I'm seeing is the emergence of the global south, and the opportunities out there are tremendous. If you really look at the world, from after India, if there is one place which is going to grow, is going to be Africa. And what India is doing is taking a hugely positive step in terms of what they've been able to do with the G20 presidency, is actually able to get Africa to be part, or African Union to be part of the G20. That itself is going to be the future of the world. It's not about anything else.
So for that to happen, India is expected, as per the reports, that it's going to contribute about 18% of the global GDP over the next 5 years. How integrated would you see Indian MNCs being with the world economy?
I think Indian MNCs are rising. Today is the era of the rise of the Indian multinational. What we are seeing is, in fact, I was surprised. If you really look at it, I have to go to Lusaka next week, which is in Gambia, and Taj has a hotel there. So that itself is a reflection that for a country which we will not even know, most of us will not know the name, there is a Taj property that exists there. So what we are seeing is that there is this emergence of the Indian multinational. And when I'm saying Taj, I'm talking about the larger idea of the Tata. Today, Tata is a truly, a multinational, which is operating in multi-set of countries, which has global brands like Jaguar and the Land Rovers of the world. And we are seeing emergence of new enterprises. In fact, I named a company called Greenko. Greenko in itself today is an enterprise which is working on green energy solutions across the world, but it's a company out of Hyderabad.
Yes.
So what we are seeing today is the rise of new kids on the block as well. And there are first generation entrepreneurs which are creating solutions for the world. So if you ask, I'm actually so positive. I'm saying that solutions for the world, or the challenges that the world faces, are not going to come from the West, they're going to come from the East. And when I say East, predominantly India. That is where the rise of multinationals will happen. I think it is very early stages right now in terms of like how India is going to move forward. It is going to be India's century in the next.
A final word, about macroeconomic stability and political stability. How interconnected are these two things? and not only from the point of view of investor outlook, but also about the future growth story of our country?
So stability always matters, and when you talk about stability, the question is going to be, how do we define stability? Stability would mean that we need to have the continuous idea of rule of law. And what India has actually been able to reflect is the idea of rule of law. That yes, if you talk about certain set of policies, it is not that the new government has come in and changed the policies of the past. They have actually accentuated those set of things over a period of time. Okay. And in fact, as India moves into elections, I do not know what is going to happen, but what I do see is any government for that matter will continue with that process. And so that is what the resilience of the Indian political system is now. This is how India will actually move forward. But having said that, economic stability and political stability do go hand in hand. If India gets into a chaos, we don't have the right government, or you're not able to form a stable government, then of course it is going to create a crisis of sorts.
I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Amit Kapoor, and earlier Dr. Nilanjan Banik, for joining us and explaining to us, about India remaining above the difficulties of the storm, flying above the storm in a sense at the current time, and continuing to that growth momentum. Thanks very much. In conclusion, let's just say this, that S&P, IMF, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, Nomura, they've all reposed faith in India's economic potential during this year. India has been driving growth because of a motivated workforce, competitive edge at the current time, aided by sound economic management during turbulent times. Clearly, India has positioned itself to fly above the storm. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.